Picture this. It's 1977. A team of New Zealand researchers steps onto a remote, wind-battered island called Stewart Island, searching for a ghost. They are looking for a bird that, by every official record, should barely exist anymore. A flightless, 3-foot-tall, lime-green parrot that can weigh as much as a house cat, so strange that scientists already believed it had vanished from the wild for good. What they find changes everything for about 15 years. Buried in the scrubland, they discover dozens, then close to 200 of these birds, alive. A miracle population hiding on an island nobody had properly searched before. Then they watch almost helplessly as that miracle population starts dying. Ordinary feral house cats are killing these birds at a rate of more than half their population every year. Scientists race to move every bird they can find onto smaller, safer islands, away from any predator at all. But by 1995, after nearly 2 decades of effort, the population has cratered. 51 birds, 31 males, 20 females. One of them, a single solitary male, had spent years as the last of his kind on the entire New Zealand mainland. That's it. That was the Kakapo, the rarest parrot on Earth, reduced to a number you could fit on a single school bus. And here's the part almost nobody talks about. What happened after that count of 51 is one of the strangest conservation stories in the history of science. Not because the birds were rescued in some simple, predictable way, but because, again and again, these 51 survivors broke rules scientists thought were absolute laws of nature. Their bodies started doing something that shouldn't have been possible. Their genetics defied a textbook principle that had held true for almost every other species on record. And just when the population finally started to recover, an invisible killer, almost certainly carried in by the very humans trying to save them, nearly wiped them out overnight. This is the real story of the Kakapo. Stick around, because by the end of this, the strangest part isn't that they survived, it's how. To understand how a parrot ends up with a body count this low, you have to understand how badly evolution failed to prepare it for the modern world. The Kakapo evolved in complete isolation on islands with no land mammals at all. No rats, no cats, no stoats, no ground predators for tens of millions of years. In a world like that, flying is expensive, burning enormous energy for little benefit if nothing is trying to eat you. So, generation after generation, the Kakapo did something almost no other parrot has ever done. It gave up flight completely. It got bigger and heavier. Adult males can weigh up to 4 kilograms, making the Kakapo the heaviest parrot species alive today. It became nocturnal, walking for kilometers through the forest each night on strong legs built for hiking, not flying. And because nothing had ever hunted it from the ground before, it developed almost no instinct to run or hide when it sensed danger. Its one and only defense was to freeze completely still and rely on mottled green feathers to vanish into the leaf litter. For tens of millions of years, that strategy worked perfectly. Then, humans showed up. Polynesian settlers arrived around the 13th century, bringing the Kakapo's first real predators and hunting the birds for food and feathers. Then, in the 1800s, Europeans arrived, bringing something far worse: cats, rats, ferrets, stoats, animals that had spent millions of years evolving to hunt small, defenseless, ground-dwelling creatures. A flightless, nocturnal, oddly fragrant bird that freezes instead of fleeing was the easiest meal these predators had ever encountered. The Kakapo's scent alone, a sweet, musty smell researchers still can't fully explain, made it almost trackable in the dark. By 1930, the Kakapo was gone from New Zealand's North Island. By the late 1980s, it had vanished from its last mainland stronghold in Fiordland too. Each population conservationists found they tried to protect, and one by one those populations were wiped out anyway. In the 1890s, a conservationist named Richard Henry shipped hundreds of Kakapo and kiwi to what he hoped would be a predator-free sanctuary. It seemed to work until stoats, which can swim, found their way across the water. By the 1940s, every bird there was dead. So when the 1977 Stewart Island population was found and then began collapsing under feral cat predation at a rate of over 50% a year, conservationists understood exactly what they were facing. They had seen this story before, and they knew if they didn't act immediately, this would be the final chapter. Between 1980 and 1997, in one of the most intensive wildlife evacuations ever attempted, every known kakapo was captured, crated, and shipped to small, predator-free islands off the coast. It should have ended the crisis. Instead, it revealed a new one. Even on islands with 0 cats and 0 stoats, the birds still weren't breeding fast enough to survive. Rats, the same stowaway rats that had crossed oceans on sailing ships centuries earlier, were getting into nests and eating eggs and chicks before they had any real chance at life. By 1995, conservationists counted at least 12 chicks born across all the islands combined. Only 3 of them had lived. 51 birds. That was the floor. That was the entire global population of one of the strangest animals ever to evolve. And from this point forward, the story stops being about predators and starts becoming something much stranger. Once the surviving birds were finally safe from predators, conservationists tried the obvious next step: get them well-fed, healthy, and breeding. They built supplementary feeding stations stocked with high-energy food, designed to push underweight females over the threshold needed to lay eggs. It worked. Females started breeding. Then, something happened that nobody predicted, something that shouldn't have been possible according to basic evolutionary math. The better fed a female kakapo became, the more sons she had, not slightly more, drastically more. Among the best-fed females, around 70% of all chicks born were male, in a species already suffering from too many males and not enough females to go around. This sounds like a coincidence. It isn't. It's a rare, real phenomenon in evolutionary biology, where mothers in excellent condition bias their offspring toward the sex that costs more to raise, but pays off bigger if it succeeds. In Kakapo, males are nearly 50% larger than females, and only the most dominant males mate at all in their winner-take-most courtship system. So a healthy mother, in theory, is placing a bet. Invest in a son, because if he wins big. The problem was, this bet actively worked against the recovery of the species. Conservationists were accidentally creating more competition for an already scarce resource, fertile females. Later modeling suggested the side effect alone could have delayed recovery by anywhere from 12 to over 100 years. They had to deliberately cap how much food each female received, threading a fine needle between starving and overfeeding, just to correct a sex ratio nobody knew they were capable of accidentally engineering. That alone would be a strange enough twist for one documentary. But the Kakapo had one more rule of nature left to break. Every textbook in conservation biology says the same thing. When a population crashes down to a tiny number of individuals and is forced to inbreed for generations, harmful mutations are supposed to build up. Inbreeding is supposed to be a death sentence written into the DNA. When scientists finally sequenced the full genome of the Kakapo, drawing blood from a female named Jane and comparing it against historical samples from extinct mainland birds, they expected to confirm exactly that. Instead, they found the opposite. Birds descended from the tiny inbred Stewart Island population carried roughly half as many harmful mutations as the more genetically diverse mainland birds that had already gone extinct. The leading theory is almost as strange as the finding itself. Thousands of years of small population size and isolation may have purged some of the worst mutations out of the gene pool, rather than letting them build up through a slow process where the most damaging genetic mistakes simply failed to survive, generation after generation. It gets even stranger. When conservationists tried genetic rescue, deliberately breeding the one surviving mainland male, Richard Henry, into the Stewart Island population to boost diversity, the resulting chicks should have come out healthier. Instead, some of those less inbred chicks had unexpectedly high death rates. The mainland genetics were quietly carrying back some of the very same harmful mutations that isolation had already managed to remove. This is the part of the Kakapo story almost nobody outside specialist genetics journals has heard. A population reduced to 51 individuals didn't just survive against impossible odds. Its own near extinction may have made its DNA more resilient, not less, directly contradicting one of the most basic assumptions in conservation science. But just as the population began climbing back from the brink, nature delivered one more gut punch, and this time, it came from somewhere nobody expected. By 2019, things were finally looking up. It was shaping up to be the best breeding season the recovery program had ever recorded. Then, in May, staff started noticing something deeply wrong. Birds went quiet, stopped eating. Within weeks, 4 chicks and an adult were dead, and nobody understood why. The killer turned out to be a fungus, aspergillosis, a respiratory infection caused by mold spores. Most healthy animals breathe in constantly without ever getting sick. But Kakapo have an anatomical vulnerability almost no other bird shares. They lack both a diaphragm and an epiglottis, the cartilage flap that normally stops you from inhaling things you shouldn't. Without it, they're unusually defenseless against spores reaching fragile lung tissue. By the time the outbreak burned out, 21 birds had been infected, roughly 1 in every 10 Kakapo alive on the planet at that moment, and 9 of them, including some of the most genetically valuable nesting females and chicks, were dead. Here's the detail that turns this from a tragic accident into something far more unsettling. When researchers sequenced the genetic fingerprint of the fungus, they found the strain across all 21 birds, scattered across nests sometimes kilometers apart, showed less genetic variation than you'd typically find within one human patient's infection. This wasn't a natural outbreak spreading bird to bird through the forest. It looked like one single source infecting almost everyone at once, and the leading theory is that it was likely carried onto the island by the very rangers and volunteers trying to save the birds. The cure may have nearly become the cause of the collapse. Vets and staff scrambled to evacuate sick birds by helicopter to wildlife hospitals, running scans on birds that had never seen modern veterinary medicine before. It worked, but only partially. And when a second, similar outbreak struck a different island years later, the team already knew what they were looking at. The lesson conservationists took from this was almost as unsettling as the outbreak itself. Saving a species this fragile means even your rescue effort can become a threat. Every visit to the island, every boot, every piece of gear carries an invisible risk. So how do you protect 50, then 100, then 200 birds, each one individually irreplaceable, scattered across remote islands, when even human presence itself can be dangerous? The answer became one of the most technologically intensive wildlife conservation programs ever built for a single species. Every surviving Kakapo wears a small radio transmitter shaped like a tiny backpack, constantly reporting its location and behavior. Male transmitters can detect movement vigorous enough to suggest mating and alert rangers in real time. Female transmitters can detect when a bird has started nesting before a human ever sets foot near the site. When a fertile egg is found, it's usually removed and placed in a controlled incubator to protect it from rats, weather, and predators. But here's where it gets genuinely strange. To stop the mother from becoming distressed by an empty nest, rangers slide in a fake replacement, a 3D printed smart egg that mimics the temperature and sounds of a developing chick, so the mother keeps behaving as if her real egg never left. When the chick finally hatches in captivity, it's returned to her nest, already primed for acceptance. Then, there's the detail that sounds almost too strange to be real. Because so many Kakapo eggs are infertile due to inbreeding, scientists collect sperm from the most genetically valuable males and artificially inseminate females, who might otherwise never produce a fertile egg at all. To move that sperm quickly across rugged, roadless island terrain, the team uses a small drone nicknamed with a perfectly straight face, the cloaca courier. Behind all of this sits a small army of volunteers who give up weeks of their lives to live alone in tents on muddy forest tracks, carrying feeding packs that weigh over 20 kilograms, maintaining round-the-clock nest surveillance. When a chick is too weak or abandoned, these volunteers become its surrogate parents, hand-feeding it every few hours until it can return to the wild. This entire infrastructure, the drones, the smart eggs, the genome sequencing, the volunteers sleeping in the rain, exists for one reason. Every individual kakapo is precious enough that losing even one bird is a genuine emergency. One of those individual birds became, almost by accident, the most famous parrot on Earth. In 2009, a kakapo who had been hand-raised by humans after a respiratory illness as a chick and had imprinted on people rather than his own species was being filmed by a documentary crew. Without warning, he climbed onto the head of one of the presenters and attempted to mate with it, live on camera, while the comedian filming alongside narrated the bizarre encounter in real time. The clip went viral, watched by tens of millions, and turned one confused, lonely bird into the unofficial face of his species. New Zealand's government later gave him an official title, Spokesbird for Conservation. If you've ever seen a neon gyrating party parrot emoji online, you've technically already met him. So, after all of that, the cats, the rats, the fungus, the impossible genetics, the drones, the volunteers, what actually happened to the kakapo? By 2022, the global population had climbed to 252 birds, the highest number recorded in 50 years. That same year, for the first time in nearly 4 decades, a handful of kakapo were released onto mainland New Zealand at a predator fence sanctuary, taking their first steps on the mainland since the 1960s. Then came a long wait. Kakapo only breed when a native tree called the rimu produces a heavy fruit crop, something that happens unpredictably every 2 to 4 years. After the 2022 season, the trees stayed quiet for 4 straight years. Then, right now, in early 2026, the rimu trees finally fruited again, and hard. Predictions showed between 50 and 60% of trees across the breeding islands bearing fruit, among the highest levels ever recorded. The season that followed has already been called the best since the original Stewart Island discovery back in 1977. As of this season, the population sits at roughly 236 birds. As new chicks have hatched week after week, this breeding season has already become the largest in the program's history, surpassing the previous record of 73 fledglings, with close to 100 new chicks confirmed and growing as you're watching this right now. From 51 to this. Here's what I keep coming back to. The kakapo isn't dangerous. It isn't useful to humans in any economic sense. It can't even fly away from you. It would have been easy to let this strange, slow, oddly scented parrot quietly disappear into the same extinction that has already swallowed thousands of species since humans started reshaping this planet. Instead, an entire country chose to build drones that deliver sperm across mountain ranges, to 3D print fake eggs that fool a mother bird's instincts, to sequence the genome of a creature most people will never see in the wild, and to send volunteers to sleep alone in the rain for weeks at a time, to protect a species most of the world had never even heard of. This is a lineage that split off from every other parrot on Earth around 80 million years ago, when New Zealand was still attached to an ancient supercontinent. Losing it wouldn't just mean losing one species, it would mean erasing tens of millions of years of evolutionary history that exists nowhere else, ever again. And the truth is, this story isn't a clean, finished fairy tale. Roughly 4 in 10 eggs laid today are still infertile. Most kakapo alive have never successfully bred at all. The species remains critically endangered, one bad disease outbreak away from another crisis, exactly like 2019. But 51 birds became 236, and counting. A species that defied genetics, defied disease, defied basic evolutionary math, not once but twice, is still here, still booming through the forest at night, still being watched over by people who have never stopped showing up. If a flightless, fragrant, accidentally comedic parrot that nearly vanished forever can come back from just 51 individuals, it raises a question worth sitting with. How many other species are we writing off right now, simply because we've decided too early that the story is already over?